Welcome to the Bridgehampton Historical Society, site of the 15th annual road rally here, and I'm joined by Jim Donnick. Jim, what a pleasure.
It's good to be here with you again, Ernie. This is always fun, and boy, we couldn't have had a better day for it, could we?
This is going to be someday, isn't it?
I must tell you, I get out here every year for this event, as you know, and we've done it together more than once, and I never cease to be amazed at, first of all, how beautiful it is, but second of all, how soft the light is and how warm all the colors are around us. It's the best way I can imagine to kick off the autumn season, and I can't think of a better place to kick it off than here in Bridgehampton, surrounded by a whole bunch of vintage sports cars and classic cars and people who are smiling and having a wonderful day.
Jim, what do our viewers have in store today?
Well, what they've got in store today is, first, of course, we'll give a quick tour of the paddock and see some of these interesting and some of them absolutely irreplaceable cars. I think we'll get a chance to go out on the circuit while these cars are running around on the rally. And this is probably a good time to tell you real quickly the difference between a race and a rally.
Yes.
Because what we're dealing with here is a road rally. A lot of these folks are going to call it the race, and for them maybe it is their race. But for those of us who do drive race cars like they did here at Bridgehampton, around the circuit and then at the circuit outside of town, where you're going for speed and get around a corner and around a circuit faster than the next guy. This is a road rally. It's done on the public roads. As they say in the UK, it's on the King's Highway, and on the King's Highway, of course, we've got to be very careful not to, first of all, upset the locals. But second of all, we have to, make sure all of the rules are followed, and it's a chance to have a good time and see some beautiful weather and some beautiful roads, of course. But the competitive aspect of it, in this case, something they call a time distance speed rally. A time distance speed rally means you've got to cover a certain amount of distance at an assigned speed. So these folks are going to come to 7 or 8 checkpoints out on the 150 miles or so of rally. And while they're doing that, they've got to get to that checkpoint not within a minute, but within 100th of a minute. And if they're more than 100th of a minute early or more than 100th of a minute late, they lose points. So what they've got to do is they've got to watch their clocks very carefully. There's a lot of math involved. You change average speeds at different times during the course of a leg, so that you really have to be doing a very thorough job. And the guy who is the most thorough and gets in at exactly the right time is going to win. Now, Jim Shelley, who is the rally master, and we'll probably talk to Jim before the day's out, Jim decided even that was too easy. And forgive me, I'm a race car driver, not a rallyist. So my idea of how you time a rally like this is, if I were doing it, and when my wife and I go out, we time it with a calendar. And that means that if we finish on the day we started, we've done pretty well. Jim thinks that's just a little bit too simple, and so he's got the time distance speed part I talked about, and then he's thrown another thing in, and what's that is a factor for averaging out the performance of cars based on their age. Now that's kind of like lining up alphabetically by height. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you intuitively, but it says, for instance, if your car was built in 1900, for instance, your final score over the course will be multiplied times 1. And so multiplied times 1 means whatever score you get, that's your score. If your car was built in 1950, let's say, they're going to take that final score, which you spent hours and hours screaming at your navigator to get within 100th of a minute at every checkpoint. They're going to take that final score and multiply it by 0.6. So no matter how well you do, you're at a terrible disadvantage in a newer car. We'll do a quick walk through the paddock here and just take a look at a few of the more interesting cars. And that almost sounds like an oxymoron because they're all pretty interesting, but I'm standing right now in front of a 1947 MGTC. Interestingly, it's sitting next to about a 1954 MGTD, which was the follow-on model. And the nice thing about this particular TC, all the TCs that were built were right-hand drive, so you'll see that the steering wheel by American standards is on the wrong side. At least as important is the TC was really the car that turned America loose on sports cars. They were relatively inexpensive, not terribly fast, but you didn't have to slow down going through a corner. They were very nimble, and everybody who had them just fell in love with them. And there were a large number of them imported, and folks had these probably the largest number of cars taken part in the first sports car races in the United States, especially that first sports car race that took place here at Bridgehampton in 1949. This one belongs to a man by the name of Arthur Lang. He's had it, I think, since the early 90s, and this car came here from the United Kingdom. It has a name. Lots of folks with interesting old cars named them. He didn't name this one. It was actually named in about 1953, and it's called Winston, and we assume it's named after Winston Churchill. One of the interesting things about TCs, which is different from some of the later ones, you might note that this is a sort of a maroon color or a burgundy color. I suppose if we were highbrow, we'd call it claret. But the inside of the grille is painted black. And you'll find that the color of the interior is also black. And with the TCs, the radiator slats were usually painted to match the interior. So you might see some red ones, you might see some green ones, and of course you'd often see black ones. So it was 1,200 cc's, 1,250 cc's, very nimble, a lot of fun to drive. And if you look at the size of the tires as well, those are 19-inch wheels, and so they're tall and narrow, and they do sort of vibrate a little bit as you go down the highway. But sitting next to the TD, which is a marvelous comparison, you see that the TD became a little more civilized than the TC. One, the seats are a little more comfortable. The windshield gives a little bit more protection. The tires are lower and wider. The steering is better. I won't bore you with the difference between rack and pinion and worm and peg. But the TD that is sitting next to it, a lot of the purists got it. They looked at it and they said, well, this doesn't look like a sports car because it appears to be too civilized. The TC, really lots of romance. Doors cut down far enough that if you were smoking a pipe, you could tap it out on the ground at a stop sign without opening the door. The TD has running boards. TD's just a little bit newer, a little bit more modern looking, and it lost some of that pre-war purity that a lot of the early enthusiasts were in love with. Having said that, it was a much better car. Now, in front of, for my money, one of the most beautiful and elegant cars here. This is a Jaguar, or as the Brits would say, a Jaguar. This is a Jaguar XK140 Coupe. Fixed head coupe, as they called that as well. The car is a very elegant design, but it is every inch a Jaguar. So weather tight, you could actually keep your lovely bride or significant other warm while you were driving down the highway, but it would go just as fast as the sports car, or the racing cars that Jaguar drove. And these were also very, very popular in rallies of their day, because the rallies in their day were very much unlike the rallies that we do now. They were over maybe 1,000 miles, and you would drive from Rome up to Liège in Belgium and back down to Rome. It was called the Rome-Liège-Rome. And you'd have to go through the Alps, sometimes in the snow. So you needed something that would give you a little bit of protection. And this one carried a certain amount of luggage. Lots of power from that 6-cylinder engine. Very good handling. For its day, very good brakes. And yet it was something you could show up in the fanciest restaurant in Mayfair and look exceptionally posh. Now, sitting almost next to it is this beautiful silver Jaguar XK120. Now, the 120 was the immediate predecessor to the 140, and it came out as a roadster, which is what we're looking at here. And the original roadsters had disc wheels, also like we're looking at here, and did not have roll-up windows. So if you remember the XK140 coupe we were looking at, which was very civilized, has roll-up windows, a hard top, very comfortable. This thing was a lot more Spartan and probably several hundred pounds less in weight, so it was just a little bit faster. The top was taken off and folded up and put into the trunk, or the boot as the Brits would say. And for side windows, it had something called side screens or side curtains. And the side screens and side curtains were just set in from the top. And if you notice over there on the door on the other side of the car, there are 2 knobs right underneath the coaming. And those knobs actually screw out a little bit, and the side screen fits under it and then gets tightened down so that they don't fall off. Again, not real civilized, very elegant. These were the things to be seen in here at Bridgehampton. and you certainly saw a lot of them in those first Bridgehampton races, but you also saw an awful lot of these in places like Hollywood, and I've seen several photographs of Clark Gable driving one, for instance. Beautiful car. This one has run the Bridgehampton Rallye several of the last 5 years and generally does quite well. Coming over from the Jaguar XK120, forgive me, I couldn't resist the urge to indulge in cliché. We go from the sublime to the ridiculous. This is a French car. It's a Citroën, and it is called a 2 chevaux 2CV, and CV, the chevaux, is horsepower, which in France, cars were taxed based on their fiscal horsepower. So they were assigned based on a calculation how many horsepower for tax purposes the car produced, and then you paid your road tax on it accordingly. The 2 chevaux was 2 horsepower. It's actually a little bit more. It's got a small 2-cylinder air-cooled engine in the front. The top folds back for open-air motoring, and this was the car, kind of like the Ford Model T put the United States on wheels. The Citroën 2 chevaux put France back on wheels after the Second World War. It was originally designed with corrugated paneling, which gave it a little more strength. This is a late model 2 chevaux. It was built in 1965. So a 65 or a 66 2 chevaux still has a corrugated hood or bonnet, but for the most part it's a lot more civilized than they were when they first came out. This was designed so that you could open it up, you could take the back seat out of it, farmers could carry all of their vegetables and things to market. The suspension had a lot of movements, they could drive it across fields. It would run just about on fumes because the original engine was a 2-cylinder air-cooled 350, 380 cc engine, which by today's standards would make a very small motorcycle. People fell in love with these cars. They still are found all over Paris, and it's just a joy to run across one here at the Bridgehampton Road Rally. This one belongs to Pierre of Pierre's Restaurant down on Main Street, and I assume he will be driving it today in the rally with the French colors flying gracefully from the back. He's got a tricolore hanging out the back, and this is not something you see every day. And if you were to compare this again to the Jaguar XK120 or to any of the other more elegant cars, it has a certain funkiness to it, but they're a delight to drive. Now, leaving the glory of France and the 2 chevaux, we come over to what is probably the pure sex appeal of Italy. This is a 1969 Ferrari. I suspect it's a 365, but it is a 4-place, so there's actually a back seat in it. The lines are as evocative as you can imagine from an Italian car, and Italian car lines are probably the most evocative in the world. It's a closed coupe, which of course the Italians did more beautifully than nearly anyone. A 12-cylinder engine in the front, 5-speed gearbox, disc brakes all around, the sort of thing that you can't help but fall in love with if you're an enthusiast. And if you're a musician, and we're surrounded right now by a lot of the kids from the Bridgehampton concert band, if you're a musician, the noise that comes out of those 4 pipes in the back is nothing short of music. We've wandered over to the other side of the paddock to what is certainly, for an enthusiast, the most exciting car here. It doesn't have the music of a V12 Ferrari. It's a straight 6. It's a 1936 Lagonda Rapide. Now, it's a 2-place car. This particular one has one of the greatest histories of the entire marque. Lagondas were made in the UK, but they were made by a man who had come there from the United States, and he took the name of a river in Ohio for the name of the car, and I believe his name was Wilbur Gunn. But Wilbur Gunn built the Lagondas, and this was a Le Mans team car, and it ran at Le Mans in 1936, and they did very, very well. This one is always known by its British license plate, EPE 97. Team car, ran, did very well, 24 hours. Imagine 24 hours strapped into that seat for two different drivers, being beaten about by the wind, bounced, not being able to see, dealing with the rain, and yet they went through, and after 24 hours, they came out right near the very top. In fact, I think Lagonda's won that year. This car belongs to Richard Lissman, and it's driven by Richard Lissman and his friend Clive Doyle. They have taken this car all over the world. They always take part in the Bridgehampton Road Rally, and if you look at some of the decals on the side that show the number of big rallies they've taken part in, I'm looking at one here that says the 2002 Winter Challenge to Barcelona. It's run the recreation of the Mille Miglia at least 8 times now, I believe. Now, the Mille Miglia in Italian is 1,000 miles, and that was a race that was run up until 1956 across the public highways of Italy, and they went from the south up to Rome and then back down again into the south to Brescia. We've got an external exhaust pipe sticking out that breathes very nicely, makes again a wonderful noise. The muffler that you see on the side is there mostly so that they can say they have one. It doesn't quiet it down a whole lot. Mr. Lissman, Dr. Lissman actually, and Clive Doyle have driven this thing probably hundreds of thousands of miles, certainly thousands and thousands of miles. 1,000 miles through Italy on at least 8 occasions. They've been in the top 3 here at Bridgehampton a number of times. They only had 3 team cars in 1936, so if you'd like to talk about a car that is unique, with a unique history, there's probably nothing else here at Bridgehampton this weekend that even comes close to rivaling this particular Lagonda. It doesn't look like it's been painted lately. I'm not even sure it looks like it's been waxed lately. And in the sports car or the vintage car world, we refer to that as patina. And the patina, of course, on this car is honestly come by, because God and the chief engineer put a motor in so that it could be driven, and this one has been driven as much or more than any other car of its era. You can't come to an American classic car event without running across one of the small T-Birds. This is a 1956 Thunderbird. This car came out in 1955, actually, and it was Ford's attempt to create a sports car that could compete with the Corvettes. These were best known because for their hardtop, which was removable, and the removable hardtop had right about there had a porthole, and they were referred to as porthole tops. Car with a lot of romance, not really a sports car, more of a pleasant car that you could take to go out to the beach or could drive around town, but it wasn't really something you went racing in, and it developed into more of a luxury touring car. The romance, though, didn't die, and after 1957, Ford made it a 4-seater, and then it got bigger and heavier until just a few years ago, Ford decided they needed to bring it back, and Ford came out with the latest Thunderbird, which was designed to bring back the memory of this car. It had the porthole removable top. It was 2-seater. Most of the colors were similar to this in that they tended to be pastels. And they didn't sell a whole lot of them, but they sold quite a few to people who wanted to recreate the nostalgia of the 50s. And of course, it was just a little more civilized. The engine had more power. The heater worked a little bit better. The car handled better. But clearly the direct descendant of the 55 and 56 and 57 Thunderbirds. This one looks like it's driven, and we're not going to point out any of the flaws in the paint, because the flaws just tell us that somebody's more interested in enjoying this on the road than they are in having a car that they keep locked up in the garage and only bring out for car shows. And forgive me if I share with you one of my own prejudices. I figure they put a motor in it to drive it, and I couldn't be happier to see one that isn't perfect but is driven regularly in events like this.
I'm joined by Alan Petrikoff and Dawn Perry, and you've got a pretty Navigator with you this year.
I'm very lucky. I'm in my 53 MG, and my wife was with me last year in the same car, and we broke down. Our brakes completely went out, and so she wouldn't come back this year. So Dawn, who's a very good friend of ours, has agreed to join me, and we've been practicing the last month weekly, and we're all set. And Dawn Tell them, how are we going to come in?
We're going to win. We're going to win.
Well, you're up for the challenge, aren't you, Dawn? Now, over the years, you've been participating in this road rally, but you've got something very different and special this year. Besides Dawn being part of your team, you have a new car here.
Yeah, this is the car that broke down last year, the 53 MG. Before that, as you know, I had my 1927 Franklin, the yellow bird, but as I tell people, it's having an artificial hip replacement right now. The car is not well. It's in the hospital.
Alan, you've been part of this road rally for a number of years. What brings you back every year?
It's an absolutely fabulous event, particularly in a day like this. To get out there in the open, it brings a little bit back of the past. Everyone feels good when these cars go by. Everybody smiles. I was just telling that to Dawn this morning. One of the great things about being in an old car is it's impossible to not have someone honk at you or smile when you go by.
Dawn, you're ready for the technical aspects of this. You have your stopwatches and everything ready?
After a last-minute run to Kmart, yes, we're ready to go.
Well, we're looking forward to following your progress and great success this day, and great having you back every year with us.
We hope we'll see you whatever, at 3 o'clock or whatever at the finish line. Just that's all we care about.
Hi, we're here with Richard Weintraub and Stephen Geller, and they're driving the number 13 car, which is a 1955 MG TF. And these guys are in matching driving suits, as we can see here. And if I'm not mistaken, Richard, you've done fairly well in this rally over the past few years, haven't you?
Yes, in the past 5 years, we actually have won 3 times with a couple different navigators. This is navigator number 3, and we're going to try to come in first again today.
Well, just for my curiosity, do you change navigators because you're tough on them, or you just want to give everybody a try?
I actually think they quit on me is actually what happens. But this is my oldest friend, my first friend ever, and I think we're going to prevail today.
Well, we're certainly hoping to see you guys in there on the podium today. Tell me a little bit about the car. How long have you been driving it?
My father's owned the car for about 25 years, and we've taken care of it. We just did a ground-up restoration on it a few years ago. And it's running well, as far as I know.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing you guys out there, and I'm a great lover of MGs, so I'm going to be rooting for you. Good luck out there.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
What a beautiful Packard you have.
Well, thank you very much.
Tell me, how did you come about to own this beautiful vehicle?
In 1968, I was in a small town north of San Francisco called Cotati, which is near Petaluma, and it was actually in a garage at a chicken farm. So it was one of those stories where the car was stuck in the garage, someone talked about restoring it, and about 2 years later, I was able to talk him out of it.
Well, Packard is in its day was the ultimate. I mean, right now we have all of these modern vehicles, but to own a Packard was the ultimate, and you've got a beautiful. Could you tell us a little bit about this 1929 Packard?
Well, I purchased this in 1969 and decided to bring it back to life. It had been driven by a college student for a few years, but wasn't in terrific shape. It was originally sold in Pasadena, California in 1929, actually on July the 2nd, and was housed in California until I purchased it and later brought it here to the East Coast and restored it. And this is a 5-passenger. The larger cars were, of course, the 7-passenger. Some of them were even 12 cylinders. This is a straight 8, 5-passenger, has a very large interior, and it runs quite well. It's actually made for the rallies.
Well, Samuel, we've seen you here before. What brings you back to the road rally?
Well, you know, it's just a wonderful time out here in the Hamptons, especially in Bridgehampton in the fall. I enjoy the weather and the camaraderie with the other drivers and in the rally, and it's a good time to bring the Packard out. Of course, there used to be the Bridgehampton car racetrack here, and the Packards participated in that, so I like to bring it back and sort of like bring it back home to do what it's supposed to do, be driven.
1929 Packard. Samuel, pleasure having you join us, and come back year after year. People love seeing you and your Packard.
Well, I look forward to being back every year, and I'm always it's just an enjoy to ride around and see the young people waving at the car and asking if they can buy one. And I enjoy actually taking some of the young kids for a drive whenever I get an opportunity, so they can experience this wonderful vehicle. Too bad they don't make Packards anymore. I see they're bringing back the Maybach and cars like, so maybe one day someone will get the idea that we should bring a Packard back.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
We're standing next to one of the most interesting cars in today's tour, and this is a 1954 Darren. It's a Kaiser Darren. Was designed by one of the great American automotive designers, Dutch Darren, and it was one of the very first fiberglass sports cars ever made in the United States. And Stan, want to tell us just a little bit about driving it, a little of the history, and then perhaps if you would like to, we ought to demonstrate for the viewers the really neat thing about the Darren, which is the way the doors open and close.
Absolutely. Again, as you had mentioned, it's one of the first fiberglass cars. Actually, because of some politicking, it beat the Corvette to the showroom floors by about a month. GM was busy giving out all the Corvettes to the mucky mucks, and Kaiser beat them to the showroom floors. The body weighs just 300 pounds, and the whole car only weighs 2,300 pounds. We were very fortunate to buy this from a collector out in Missouri, and it's just a wonderful car. It's fun to drive. It's very responsive, quick steering. It's just a fun little car.
Now the engine is a straight six-cylinder?
It's a straight six-cylinder, 161 cubic inches, 90 horsepower. It's actually a Willys. The Willys Jeep Company, they supplied the motor.
Wow. Now, did you guys have to do the restoration because the paint looks flawless?
No, actually, this was done in '92, and we bought the car pretty much the way you see it. We added the mirrors, and we've done some mechanicals. That's it.
Wonderful. Well, before we finish, we really have to show people these doors because in those days, of course, doors were interesting, and we're going to go over shortly and take a look at a Gullwing 300 SL Mercedes where the doors went straight up. But these are really cool, too. And Stan, you want to show them how the door works?
Absolutely.
On a Darren?
All you do is just slide it back, handle goes down, door is locked.
So when you think about it, you never have to worry about opening the door in front of oncoming traffic.
And it's great in parking lots. You don't have to swing the door into another car.
Of course, somebody may still swing into you.
Unfortunately, that's correct. And when we do take this to like King Cullen or somewhere, we tend to park pretty far out.
Well, that's wonderful. And you guys are in the tour today?
This car's in the tour, correct.
Okay, well, we hope you have a wonderful time. The weather is going to be perfect, and we look forward to seeing you someplace out on the road.
That'll be fun. Thank you.
Okay, good luck.
Jim Donick, we're joined by the man who works 12 months out of the year, 24 hours a day to make this possible. Jim Shelley, our tour director, chairman extraordinaire.
You know, with what I get paid, what that works out to per hour.
Well, given that you're not being paid,
we can double your salary.
Thank you. Yes, it's very kind of you
But
all.
in fact, that's not really fair because
well,
I've been doing this.
It's a labor of love.
And you get paid in smiles.
And yeah, and it's a very satisfying feeling, you know, when everybody is here and Friday night, big success for everybody. Cheered up yesterday, all our workers, and they said, "Oh, new people are here, and it's great," and it was just exciting. And you know, and what can you say when you have a wonderful day like this? We picked our weekend right a year in advance.
We're celebrating our 15th year.
This is the 15th, and one of the things that Jim always does is, of course, he puts a little something into the rally that people aren't exactly expecting. I remember one year we were out, I think, on Shelter Island, and as we looked over the edge of the road, if we got about 3 inches to the right, we probably would have had 2 wheels going off down into a ditch someplace that was a mere, 8 to 40 feet deep. Now, Jim, just for our curiosity, what have you got in store for them today? They're gone, so they can't hear.
Landfall.
Landfall?
Landfall, yes. Landfall is out above Cedar Point Park, and it's probably the most confusing set of roads in the Hamptons. And the timing stop there is on a steep hill.
You know, you're a really nice man.
I tried. And the wild turkeys.
The wild turkeys?
The wild turkeys are in landfall.
The wild turkeys in landfall.
Go to landfall. There's like turkeys wandering around.
So when they come in here this afternoon, and I lean over the car and I say, if you had anything to remember about the rally that you'd just as soon forget, what was it? Yeah, they're going to say landfall.
They should be driving by Montauk Point, the lighthouse. This is a very scenic rally. A lot of beaches in it. They have nothing to complain about. They will do nothing but complain when they come back in. It'll be great.
Done that. Now, if there was anything you could do to this rally, and you're in charge so you nearly can, anything you could do to make it different or better, or if you had one wish for the rally, what would it be?
I'd stop all other traffic at the Shinnecock Canal for the weekend.
I think I could
You could get behind that?
I think I could find a lot of people who
It's
support
getting
that.
really hard to lay out a route because there's just so much traffic.